Okay, I hope people can find enough seats. There are some more seats on either side, so please do find a seat. Welcome to class. This is the class Introduction to Deep Learning. Maybe the first time you're hearing it. That's good. It's also the first time that I'm teaching it. So we're all new to it. I should say I was the person who initiated this class originally long time ago, back in 2017. And one of my postdocs, Laura, she actually decided to teach this class back in 2017. And it's been running ever since, and it's gotten extremely popular and extremely successful. But it is actually, for me, the first time to teach it myself. Before I go into it, I'd like to introduce the team that is, apart from myself as lecturer for this class, we have 3 teaching assistants, Shenhan, Jason, and Jan. And we also have a number of student tutors, but I'll hand over to Shenhan to do this introductory part.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shenhan from Professor Cremers' group. Yeah, and we have 3 TAs for this course. And also, we have several student tutors who will be actively helping you with online Q&A and also with our exercises. Okay, about this lecture, the general structure is we have 2 major parts. One is the theory lectures happening every Tuesday at 2, like now, in-person live streamed. And also we are going to have a tutorial and exercise every week, every Thursday at 10. And it's going to be in a form of online form. Yeah, we are going to upload these tutorial videos and also the code for the exercises, and you will be able to access them via Piazza and our webpage. So here's a preliminary syllabus of this course. We are going to cover these topics. You are going to be equipped with these skills and knowledges for deep learning. And an important thing to know is we are moving from the official Moodle platform to Piazza because it's more friendly to online discussions. So make sure that you scan this QR code and join our class. Also, our QA session and our office hour is going to be pure online because we have so many participants. Yeah, and our student tutors will answer your questions online. And on this Piazza platform, please do not post any solutions. Please give the chance for others to solve the problems by themselves. But also you can post private questions, which is only visible to us tutors, TAs. Yeah, that's up to you. So the first resource we have is a website. You can access this web page of our group by this link. And also, if you have any question, not about the content of the course, but about the organization, you can then contact this email list. Yeah, and every week we have this virtual office hours, and you are going to find the links, the Zoom links for it via our Piazza platform. And our student tutors will give you theoretical help and also about the exercises. One thing we cannot tell you is the exact date of the exam because it's decided centrally by the university. Yeah, and an important thing is we're not going to have retake exam. But since this course is running every semester, you will be able to take the exam of the next semesters. notice that we have, if you can solve 9 out of 10 exercises, you are going to have a bonus point of 0.3 for your final exam. And this bonus point is transferable from previous and future semesters. Also, if you are an external student from either LMU or you are a TUM PhD student, you can still fill out our registration form, which can be found on our web page, so that we can register you to Piazza and also our submission system for the exercises. So, and in the end, check our announcement on Piazza and also regularly check our course website. Thank you a lot. Then let's invite Professor Cremers.
Thank you, Shenhan, for this short introduction on the organizational matter and also for coordinating the tutorials. You can imagine this is a significant challenge because we have lots of students. And I should say I've been working in this field of artificial intelligence for over 20 years now, and it started much smaller. You know, when I taught master's classes 15, 20 years ago, I'd usually have 20 students, maybe 25 students, but now we're looking at thousands. So that shows you a little bit that artificial intelligence is becoming a big popular topic, and it has endless applications in all areas of society. What is artificial intelligence? How does it affect us in everyday life? Well, here's an example. This is footage taken 20 years ago, roughly, where we collaborated with the company Mercedes, putting cameras into cars, and we filmed the action in front of the car. A typical scene that you all know: you drive down the street, and and then someone might come running into your driving corridor. A situation that happens daily all over the world, and there's lots of accidents happening today and every day with people being involved in traffic accidents, being hit by cars, people getting injured or even dying. And it's probably one of the biggest causes for death in modern society. So what if we could take this camera footage that we can record easily and use from this camera data, reconstruct the world in front of the car in 3D, and not only the 3D world, but even the movements that are color-coded here. Red means moving, green means stationary. And this motion information can then help us analyze the scene, make predictions about what's going to happen next, predictions of the type that if this obstacle keeps running at the same velocity, it will be in the driving corridor in the next seconds. And you can imagine, the further we can anticipate into the future what's going to happen next, the better we can help avoid accidents and save lives, either by triggering a warning signal or by actively engaging and braking. And this is this field that used to be called advanced driver assistance and is now often referred to self-driving cars, the ambition being that sooner or later the car can drive itself. And you've probably heard a lot about self-driving cars, and you might be wondering, where are they? When are they coming? It's a question I often get. And they're already out there in different parts, like in California, there's a lot of self-driving cars driving around. One thing that the public often doesn't realize is the autonomous driving is not so much a matter of acceleration and braking and steering, especially with electric cars, that's trivial. Right? The challenge of self-driving cars is for the car to understand its environment, to understand where it is, where the world is, and to anticipate what's going to happen next so that it can optimally adjust its driving behavior to avoid accidents. And this essentially involves predominantly computer vision. What is AI? I don't want to go too deep into what is intelligence, right? Everyone has their own ideas about what intelligence is. When I was a kid, for example, people would say, oh, someone who can play chess is intelligent. So that's a form of intelligence. And so invariably that triggers researchers to say, can I build a machine that can play chess? And you'd think that's a recent dream. No, it's not. It's several centuries old. This is a machine built in Germany by a guy named Wolfgang von Kempelen, which became known under the name Mechanical Turk. It was built in 1770. And it's a machine that he would present much like in a magic show, right? You would have this box, magic box machine, right? And then you would open, the curtain on one side and say, there's no one in there. So then you would turn it around and the little chess player who was in there would hide in a different corner. Then you would open from the back saying, see, there's no one here either. Then you would close it all. And then the little chess player, a human chess player, would move the chess pieces on the board. And lots of the, famous people of the times, people, for example, Napoleon, played against this machine, right? And they were mesmerized by this idea of a machine that could exhibit some intelligent behavior. And so this dream of creating artificial intelligence, machine intelligence, that is something that is centuries old. That's been fascinating humans, I guess, ever since we came to this world. Obviously, it was a hoax. It wasn't real. It was not a real machine. It couldn't really play chess autonomously. It was a human inside, but, the make-believe was the thing. And but as you know, this dream became reality with the advent of computers. People were able to code chess programs. And I was hit with them early on. I mean, when I was 14, 13 years old, I got one of the first home computers, a computer called Commodore 64. And that computer came with lots of games, in particular a chess program. And I remember playing that chess computer, and I remember it had 7 levels of difficulty, and already on level 2 it always beat me, right? Now that said, at 13, 14 years I was not a great chess player, admittedly, but I never even tried levels 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Because it was pointless, because it was always beat me, right? But then what that showed me somehow is that it would just be a matter of time until the chess programs are powerful enough to beat even the best chess players in the world. And as you know, this happened, and this is IBM's Deep Blue 1996, a machine that could compute 126 million configurations per second. So a very brute force way of solving the problem. But as a result, it beat the best chess player in the world. And so that game is kind of won by the machine. There are other games where where it was significantly more challenging. For example, Go took about 20 more years until the best Go player was beat by a software that can play Go. And that software actually already started using learning-based techniques, not just brute force computing. But you can ask yourself, is that really all of intelligence? Machines that can play chess or Go? And one thing you realize when you think about it is that humans were never designed to play chess by evolution, right? We don't come to this world with the knowledge how to play chess. It's a rather particular game that I would argue that the human brain isn't even made for in a way. But there are things that we are made for. This is a picture I took when I gave a talk in the German museum earlier this year. It's the museum shop. And what amazes me is how we as humans, we can look into this world and we can see things and we can recognize things like Einstein here, right? In fractions of a second. And if you think about it, how many faces have you seen in your life? Thousands of faces, and yet you can recognize a given face in fractions of a second. How does that work, right? Our brain is doing massive computations. You might not be realizing it. You might be listening to me now. You might be thinking about what you did last night. But 50% of your cortex is constantly processing visual information. That's how important vision is for humans. That's also showing you it's not an easy challenge, but this is what the human brain in particular was designed for. To process our sensory information from the eyes, from the ears, from our senses, in order to give us an understanding of the world around us that enables us to interact, to engage in the world and to do things, right? And this is the real challenge of artificial intelligence, is to reproduce that capacity of humans to process and understand sensory data. How do we do this? Well, it's easy, right? We have cameras. Often people think computer vision, we have cameras, that solves the problem. Well, that solves part of it. It solves what the eyes do. They acquire the light that comes in on the retina. We can reproduce that with cameras. So far, so good. Then that light information is sent up to the brain and processed. How would that look like? Well, let's look at Einstein close-up. Zoom in into the eye. This is the patch in the eye. You can encode it for the machine with numbers, right? Bright values are high numbers. Dark values, like in the bottom right of this patch, are low numbers. So this patch here in the eye of Einstein looks like that in the machine. And the whole image, the whole picture that you see is a huge matrix of numbers, right? Now, assume I were to give you that number matrix of numbers and ask you, what do you see? Do you see Einstein? Most of you are smiling now thinking, no, that's not what I'm seeing. I see. But it's the same information. It's all there. Every number encodes one brightness. All the information you need is right there in this matrix. Except not prepared in the way that you're used to, right? And now you start to understand what we expect from a machine. If we want to reproduce this capacity, we expect that we give it these numbers and it tells us what's in the image. Right? That's what we want. And now think about it some more. If I move the camera just a little bit, all these numbers will move accordingly, right? So I can't just tell the machine, I can't just write a program and say, memorize these numbers. And if you see the same set of numbers again, say Einstein. And if not, then no Einstein, right? That's not how it works, right? If you rotate the camera, all the numbers will rotate accordingly. If you zoom in or out, the whole array of numbers will change. And if you change the lighting in the room, all the brightness values will change. No number will stay the same. So what are you going to do? Are you going to memorize all variations of Einstein in all rotations, scaled and rotated and translated with all possible illuminations? And what if he puts on sunglasses, right? Different brightness values again, right? Or if he grows a beard, right? We as humans, we can still recognize people. How can you teach a machine to do exactly that? Now you'd say this sounds like an impossible task. It seemed like an impossible task for decades, but we are getting somewhere, as you know. Nowadays I can take my cell phone, I can look into it and it will unlock. Guess what happens in the cell phone? It recognizes my face. So magically we have achieved this. And these are the real breakthroughs of AI. Now you could say, wait, it doesn't always unlock. I know. There's still, room for improvement. And that's why you're all sitting here. We need talents to build the next generation of AI systems that can do all of this. But let's go back a little bit. Back into around 2010, 2011. One of my friends and colleagues in the field, Fei Li, and her team at Stanford, her students, they put out a big data set. This data set contains 14 million images of different objects, right? For example, this category of objects, you can see what it is. Anyone recognize what's in all of these images, the dominant object? A dog, more specifically? A Dalmatian dog, exactly, right? So you can imagine there's lots of images and lots of classes. If we have one class just for every dog breed, that's going to be lots of classes. And then we have other objects, not even dogs, not even animals, but plants. Anyone recognize what this class is? Yeah, more difficult. Anyone? Pumpkin? Not quite. It's sweet. Physalis, exactly. Physalis. But indeed, you know, the Germans are not good at recognizing physalis because you don't find them much here in the supermarkets, right? So I think the recognition capability of humans is somewhat culturally varying as well, right? So if you live in a place that has abundant physalis, you will recognize it more easily than if not, obviously. And so if you ask an average human to go through this data set and classify, label images, then humans will not have a perfect performance. And so you can then take this as a challenge. Say, here's an image, tell me what the object is. Obviously, there are many things in the images, but there's typically one dominant object. Which one is it? And you give the machine a set of classes, maybe 100 classes, whatever, and it should tell you for each image what's the class. And then you can have a competition, like in chess, machine against human, right? And this was the state of affairs in 2011. Whereas humans would make an average of 5 mistakes on a certain set of images, the machine, the best computer vision algorithm in 2011, would make 26 mistakes. So very far from human performance, at more than 5 times the error that the average human has. The average human, I guess you would be better since you recognize physalis, you would probably only have 1 or 2 errors. Yeah. But the average human. And the truth is, in 2011, I distinctly remember there was a clear feeling in our vision community that we would never reach human level performance. And then something rather magical happens. Then Alex Krzyzewski and collaborators proposed to tackle this challenge with what's called a deep neural network, which is a system that we'll learn about in this class that is very much inspired by the human brain, where the visual information that comes in from the retina is processed in several layers of neurons in what in the brain is called the visual pathway. And you can try to reproduce this processing by layers of processing where the information comes in from the left, the brightness values, and they are then sequentially filtered and processed and layer by layer. And at the very right, you get an output that gives you a classification. And this architecture on the exact same challenge managed to do it with only 16.4 errors. Still more than the human, but a significant drop in error, right? A significant breakthrough, and this is what sparked the revolution of deep neural networks, this one paper here. Because it's not that they invented the deep networks. In fact, there's endless arguments of who actually invented things. You know, you've seen the Nobel Prizes last week. You know, it's that always sets certain history in stone. But still, you can debate who actually invented things, and this is a never-ending debate. But this is the paper that really created the hype of deep networks because people realized you can really do amazing things with them. That said, some of the pioneers realized it years before, but no one listened to them, right? That's typically what happens when you're a pioneer. Initially, no one wants to listen to you. But here, this really was a breakthrough. And so in the wake of this 2012 paper, more and more sophisticated neural network architectures were published to tackle the same challenge. And as you can see, around 2015, we were able to outperform the average human on a task that arguably the human brain was designed to solve. Understanding the world from images from our sensors, right? And so for me, this marks the real breakthrough of artificial intelligence when you compete with the human, not on something like chess that the human is not made for, but at something that arguably the human brain was designed to do. I mentioned it, this paper has probably 160,000 citations or more by now. It's one of the most influential publications in the last years. In fact, the most influential one I know of in the last, say, 10 years. A massive breakthrough, and as you may have heard last week, the Nobel Prizes in Physics went to these two pioneers of neural networks, John Hopfield and Geoffrey Hinton. Incidentally, I studied physics myself. This was the Nobel Prize for Physics, and in the late 90s, I wanted to go into neural networks, to do a PhD in this area of neural networks. And I sent emails to many researchers, about 10. One of them was Geoff Hinton. And I sent him email saying, "Dear Professor Hinton, I'd like to do a PhD with you. Do you have any availability, any openings?" He didn't reply. Now, nowadays when I say someone didn't reply, it basically mostly means that I overlooked the email, right? Because I get hundreds of emails a day. But in '97, I did not get hundreds of emails a day. I know he did not reply. I didn't overlook any emails. And then others did reply, and they said, "Young man, you seem quite talented. Why do you want to go into an area that is completely dead?" So I said, "Whoa, okay." So I went into the area anyway, right? I went and joined a researcher who was actually a former graduate from John Hopfield. And I worked with him on neural networks in '98, '99 in theoretical biology, because in that area they were actively doing research in neural networks. And we had John Hopfield come see us in Berlin at the time. We invited him to a workshop, etc. So sometimes it's best not to listen to the experts when they tell you not to do something, right? So if ever I tell you not to do something, don't listen to me. What do I know, right? So this was a breakthrough, and in the wake of this work, we and many others looked into how can we apply neural networks to solve a variety of challenges in artificial intelligence and data analysis. For example, this is one work we did, there's many, but we started around 2014 working on deep networks. This is one work we published where we showed you can use deep nets for tuberculosis screening from X-ray imagery. You take one breast X-ray, as you see here, and if I showed you these images, again, you could say humans were not designed to solve this task. We were designed to recognize a dog and distinguish it from a cat and a lion from a lamb or something. Why? Because it's important. If you don't see it's a lion, then you're not going to survive long, right? So understanding what we have in front of us is vital for survival, and that's a strong driver. But the one thing we don't see by evolution is X-ray images of chest, right? And if I showed you these images and asked you which of these has tuberculosis, which one doesn't, the average human would not be able to do that. If you're an expert doctor, then you can, a radiologist, then you have a chance of distinguishing healthy from diseased. But if this is not your area, like I look at these images, they look the same to me. But we can train a neural network. Just give it a lot of training data of healthy and diseased patients and their X-rays, and train a deep neural network, and it will do the trick, and it will tell you this has tuberculosis, this one is healthy. And that's obviously very useful, because you can screen someone and instantly, in a second, get feedback from an AI that tells you is he healthy or not. Is that classification perfect? No. Just to say that up front, nothing is ever perfect in this field of deep networks, right? People always expect machines do not make mistakes. They expect the self-driving car should never make any accident. Obviously, we all want that, right? But there's always a certain risk. There's always a certain uncertainty. But what you can do in addition, you can train a neural network to tell you which areas in the image were important for this decision process. Which areas did the machine particularly focus on when it decided between healthy and tuberculosis? And you can then do quantitative analysis and compute these so-called receiver operator curves that basically show you that you have fairly little false positives and you have a lot of true positives, right? So when the machine says it's tuberculosis, then indeed most likely it is, and when it says it's not, then most likely it's not. In these curves you really want to be in the top left corner, but you know, this is already pretty good, and we showed that you can do this with deep networks. But there's so much more than computer vision and image analysis that you can do with deep networks. For example, in 2016, we published a paper where we showed that you can take an amino acid sequence and predict its protein structure, the 3D structure of the protein that it encodes. This is a big challenge in biology because proteins form a lot of the things in nature. And understanding what amino acid sequence encodes which protein is very important for protein design, etc. It's a very hot topic in biology. How did we tackle this with deep networks? Well, you can compute what's called the contact map. That is a map that tells you which amino acids are in contact with which other ones, and that actually then tells you the structure. And now the challenge is, how do we get the contact map? How can we determine from the amino acid sequence on the left which amino acids are in contact with which other ones? This is how we proposed to solve it in 2016. We tapped into a data set of what's called homologous sequences to identify sequences by correlating with our input sequence, which ones are similar. And then we can compute so-called pairwise variance of mutations. And we can compute what's called the co-evolution statistics, which amino acids evolve jointly with which other ones, looking at these homologous sequences. And then comes the clue. We take these co-evolution statistics and feed them into a convolutional graph neural network. And that can be trained on a big data set of amino acids with known structure. And it allows us to predict the contact map and hence the 3D structure in what was in 2016 with unprecedented precision. Now you might be sitting there thinking, wait, that sounds somehow familiar. Does it? Have you followed the news last week when you heard about the Nobel Prizes? There was one given out for Google AlphaFold. Well, AlphaFold, this, what we published in 2016, Google used it as a blueprint for AlphaFold. Why they ended up getting the Nobel Prize, I don't know. At that point, it's politics. But the paper is there for anyone to validate that we did it at least 2 years earlier. And obviously AlphaFold went much further than we did. They put more training data at it, throughout it. They did more training, more hyperparameter tuning, etc. And they really beat the hell out of this challenge and showed that you can further boost the performance of the predictions, right? But the key idea of using graph neural networks and train them on to predict from the co-evolution statistics the 3D structure, this is the idea that we put forward in 2016. Are they going to revoke the Nobel Prize? No, they never do. It's hopeless. My colleagues say, Daniel, that ship has sailed. So we move on. AI is everywhere. There's panels on AI, the future of AI. This was earlier in Paris this year. You see one of the pioneers who unfortunately did not get a Nobel Prize, Yann LeCun, also a pioneer of the deep neural networks. He got a Turing Award for it though. And Michael Jordan, very famous machine learner from Berkeley. And so you know, everyone's discussing the future of AI. And it's important, and there's a lot of things happening. And so here in Munich as well, we're active in many ways. I'm directing a European a network unit of a European network called ELIS, European Lab for Learning and Intelligent Systems. It's a network of excellent AI competence centers across Europe. I'm also one of the directors of the Munich Center for Machine Learning. This is one of 6 German national AI centers. And this brings together 50 PIs from both LMU and TUM, roughly equal a number from each university. And it's supported with around 20 million a year by the national and the Bavarian government. The Munich Center for Machine Learning, it has 3 pillars. One is on the foundations. This includes the mathematical and algorithmic foundations. People often overlook that aspect. You know, there's a lot of math and computer science to actually make all of these methods work. Then there's domain-specific machine learning. So this is machine learning in various application areas, like in biomedicine, in chemistry, in physics, in earth observation, even in social sciences, where you want to understand how does the population behave on social networks, how are they going to vote. All of this can be tried to, one can try to understand and model with AI, with in fact, neural networks. And the third pillar in MCML is one on perception, vision, and natural language processing. Why is that a separate pillar here? It is because, first of all, vision and image analysis is not a specific application area, right? You can do image analysis for Earth observation, for chemistry, for biology, for many different, for medicine, right? So image analysis and vision are used in many application areas, and they're more a methodological area. And the other aspect why we made it a separate pillar is that a lot of the core innovations in AI actually emerge from the understanding of images and language. This is where the deep networks came out, in the processing of images and of language. And so I think it's worth having a separate pillar here, in between foundations and applications. But let's come more to this lecture. What is this lecture about? It's about deep learning. And deep learning is part of AI. And if you want a graphical visualization, you can say there's all of AI. Then inside AI, there is a subfield called machine learning. And inside machine learning, there is a particular branch called deep learning. That picture is misleading because 90% of AI research nowadays is deep learning. Right? It's because that technique is just so amazingly powerful that everyone jumped on it to try to understand it better or to apply it for various challenges like protein prediction, if you will. What is AI? Again, I don't want to, people have different definitions of AI, from rather narrow to rather broad definitions. Nowadays, if you take a set of numbers and compute the average, you can call it an AI algorithm if you want, right? No one is gonna, kill you for it, and it's just hip to call everything AI. Doesn't mean it's necessarily super profound just because it's called AI. And at some point, any kind of data analysis will be called AI. And you'd be surprised how many experts on artificial intelligence pop out of the ground like mushrooms these days. Why is that? Well, it's because the money goes into AI. So if you come up and say, hey, I'm an AI expert, you get money, right? That's how it works. It's like if you put water on the ground, the mushrooms come out. That's how it works. So classical AI was often logic and rule-based reasoning. Systems where you said, if A, then B. For example, if it's cold in the room, then turn up the heat. Nothing terribly profound, nothing very deep, but an if then else type of thing. This was reasoning, and people actually believed that with this kind of reasoning they could reproduce human cognition. And unfortunately they found no. because that's not what's going to make a car drive autonomously, right? Sure, I've seen people in automotive industry dealing with questions like, if a truck comes from the right, then we should stop because it has the right of way. That's a rule. You all learned it in driving school. If you put that rule into a self-driving car, it's not going to work, right? How does it know that there's a truck coming from the right? Can you be sure that there's a truck coming from right? That's the real challenge. Once you know there's a truck, then everything is easy, right? So the if-then-else kind of thing, that's trivial. The key challenge is understanding what's happening, is seeing the truck. That's the challenge, right? And so, invariably this, if-then logic reasoning, there is a lot of power in it, and there's a lot of amazing technology that has been developed for machines that can do logic and can do reasoning. It's definitely impressive, but this is not, I would say, the core difficulty here. But there's many algorithms, binary search to find something in a big data set. Dijkstra's algorithm, if you've heard it, to compute shortest paths. If I switch on my phone and I say, give me the shortest way to Berlin, and it does it in fractions of a second, that's Dijkstra type shortest path algorithms running, right? This is a form of AI, if you will, the A star, the prime, the Korskal, logic algorithms. So there's a lot of this in AI. And then there is machine learning, and these are techniques for data analysis that have shown to be very powerful. Linear and logistic regression, support vector machines that were hip in the 90s and 2000s, around 2000, random forests, random decision trees, jungles, etc. So there's a lot of techniques that were developed in the field of statistical data analysis and machine learning over the years. And we'll touch on some of these in this class. And then more specifically in this area of machine learning, there's the deep learning, the deep neural networks. And that involves a number of things that we will be discussing. For example, multi-layer perceptrons, convolutional neural networks, recurrent neural networks, transformers, generative models. There's tons and tons of different techniques that are coming out every year. And the field is moving so fast, it's almost impossible to keep track of all the latest developments here. Deep learning and machine learning have endless application areas. These are some of the areas where they were deployed with immense success. For example, computer vision to recognize things in images, like I showed you, medical imaging, where I showed you can detect not just tuberculosis, but also cancer or many other things that you want to identify when screening patients. And, even if AI systems will not make a perfect decision on saying this patient has the tumor or doesn't, they can give you indications. And this can help a medical expert. So rather than screening thousands of patients, the medical expert can have an AI pre-process and tell him which are the images where the AI believes there might be a tumor. And that might be only maybe 10 images, and then the expert can look at these, and it will just make the workflow efficient, and it will alleviate the work of the expert and support the expert. And this is how it's often used in this field that's now often called personalized medicine, where you have AI algorithms that can look at you as a person and all the data about you and make recommendations to what treatment would be in order, and they can tell you how likely is this treatment going to work given the data that is there. An analysis that is essentially impossible for medical experts. They can't look at everything. They can't look at a full-blown 3D scan of your body and your blood print and tissue analysis and your age and your whole history, medical history. Taking all of this into account at the same time is something that the human brain is not designed to do. And AI systems can do it. Right? So in medical imaging, medical in general, AI plays a very important role for the future. In robotics as well, again, you know, people think there's a lot of challenges in robotics, especially humanoid robots, for example. But one of the premier challenges is the sensor analysis, is for the robot to understand the environment it's in, much like the car, right? And so again, and what sensors are robots using? Many, but predominantly cameras. And then it's back to computer vision. Natural language processing is kind of this sister discipline of computer vision. A lot of techniques that work on images can be applied to language. A lot of techniques that work on language can be applied to images. And you can make a living out of it, studying one discipline and transferring the know-how to the other. We've done that, many people have. It's quite a useful approach. And computer graphics, but many more. You take Earth observation, social science, chemistry, physics, everywhere you look, people are keen on deploying AI, learning-based methods. And it's so many applications of deep networks that we cannot really cover all of them in this class. So let's look at the area where the breakthroughs happened, computer vision, and one of the biggest application areas in AI. People overlook that. They think it's the big time of AI, but the real hype happens in computer vision. That's where the conferences grow like crazy year after year. And this is what enables a lot of the AI technology in everyday life. The fact that you can unlock your smartphone by looking into it, all of these, they use computer vision. Let's go back in time. You know, where did that start? Computer vision started roughly in the 1960s. I'm sure you could go back earlier in history. As always, there is no end. If you try to trace back ideas, you will end up with the ancient Greeks sooner or later, or even earlier, right? No kidding. They've done a lot of things. But in the 1960s, there was a group of researchers that formed with the aim of mimicking the human visual system. To do for robotics application, you know, because this is a center building block that the robot understands what's in front of him and abstracts and that it applies learning. Why? Because if you want a robot to engage in the complex world, that world changes all the time. You know, if you have a robot in a factory today, in an assembly belt, you know, it just puts a piece into, into, let's say, a car. That's the same movement over and over. You can pre-code that, fine, that's it. This is how most robots are used today in factories, right? It's a very controlled environment. There will never be any humans interfering with the robot, right? And it will be doing a very stupid, always the same task. But if you want robots to, for example, support the elderly, then they have to engage with humans in the real world. And the real world is complex and it changes. And you cannot pre-program every movement of the robot and hope that's going to solve the trick. It won't. If something happens, if, you know, there's an obstacle coming in the way of the robot, then it better stop. It better understand that it shouldn't run over the little dog, right? Otherwise, it would defeat the purpose if the elderly lady gets a robot to help and then the robot steps on the dog. Not good. So, back in the 60s, the aim was to reproduce the visual system. And interestingly, at that time, there was a lot of know-how already about the primate visual system, how it works. These are two pioneers, but again, you've learned this from my last couple of slides. You may not want to overrate Nobel Prizes, but you know, because a lot of people do a lot of things and some end up with the Nobel Prizes and others don't. These are David Hubel and Thorsten Wiesel. And what they developed were techniques to understand and to reveal insights into the primate visual system. Works that they started in the 50s and that ended up in a Nobel Prize in '81. About 20 years later, right? Back then it took a little more time for people to get Nobel Prizes, not as quick as with AlphaFold. But then they didn't have Google as a big company to do PR. What they did was quite amazing and very tedious experiments. They recorded from neurons in the visual pathway, in different parts of the visual pathway, further outside, further inside, and they recorded from hundreds and hundreds of neurons. A hugely complicated and effort that they put in. Why? Because when they recorded from neurons, what they wanted to understand is how these neurons in the visual pathway respond to stimuli, to light. And the answer was, mostly they didn't, right? So you found a neuron, you record, and it never ever fires, right? And you can display to the cat whatever you want, and the stupid neuron does not fire, right? And so it was a lot of effort they put in to figure out eventually when does a certain neuron fire. And they identified various different types of neurons in the visual pathway, distinguishing simple cells from more complex cells. And they found that there are cells that in the visual cortex that respond to directional input. So they would respond to an edge being presented at a certain angle. Right? And if you presented the same edge at a different angle, that neuron would not fire. It would only fire if it was 11 o'clock. And then they started recording more in the vicinity and found the neighboring neurons fired to other angles, right? And so there was a way that the neurons could encode whether there was an edge presented at a certain angle or not. Something that was quite illuminating about how the visual system worked. And then there are so-called complex cells that only fire if there is an edge at a certain angle and moving in a certain direction. If it didn't move, that cell wouldn't fire. It only fired if the edge moved. So this was some of the things they managed to discover in their experiments. And that laid open a little bit how the visual pathway of mammals and hence also humans works. To date it's not fully understood, and there's a lot of neuroscientists doing research on primates to understand how does the brain really work, how does it really process the informations that we're getting. In parallel, a few years later, people like Seymour Papert started trying to do computer vision. And this is a very famous paper from 1966 by Seymour Papert. And as you can see, this paper is called the Summer Vision Project. His hope was that we would solve computer vision in a summer project in 1966. Well, guess what? That did not work, right? So it was a big failure, if you will. But, he said the aim is to do a construction of a significant part of the visual system, the human visual system, just put it in a machine in a summer, Imagine you were the student of Seymour Papert and who told you, why don't you go do that this summer, right? You have 3 months. Yeah, and pattern recognition, and solve the pattern recognition problem in your summer project. Yeah. So you can say it didn't work, it was a failure, but at least someone had ambition here, right? And set out an agenda of what he thought we should be tackling. And that is essentially the agenda that we're still working on today, right? Whatever, 50 years later, right? 1966. a few decades later. We're still working on it. There's computer vision, one of the biggest areas in data analysis and AI. Actually, for example, the CVPR conference is the flagship computer vision conference. This is a conference that gathers, at this point, over 10,000 people every year, 10,000 researchers every year. And it is the most influential conference in the world in terms of impact. You know how you can measure the impact of scientists. You can compute what's called an H-index. You can do the same for conferences to see how much is a paper published in this conference cited in the wake of this work. And CVPR is the #1 conference in the world. It has been for years. But it's not just computer vision. There's robotics, there's speech processing, there's the neurosciences, AI, machine learning, algorithms, optimization. And there's a lot about optics and how cameras work that matters to computer vision. So there's many adjacent research areas that are relevant. And there's obviously many disciplines involved: engineering, math, computer science, physics, biology, psychology, and chemistry, or you name it, right? It plays a role all over. The classical approaches, essentially inspired by Hubel and Wiesel, they proceeded to recognize objects and process images in the following way. They tried to reproduce what these simple and complex cells do in the brain, and they developed feature descriptors that compute certain orientations in the image and tell you which edge orientation do I see in this or that part. And you can see if you do that to a cat, then you find in some sense this typical pattern with the eyes of the cat here. Right, you see it. And then you can imagine, even if the cat has a different colored fur and different colored eyes, you would still see the same patterns, right? And so then you can pipe these features, and they were extracted by gradient detectors or descriptors that are called SIFT and SURF and HAR and HOG. There were lots of them, very important works over years. And these were then fed into learning algorithms that take this pre-processed output as input to a support vector machine, a random forest, or some neural network. And then label based on that, train with training data to detect a cat in an image. And that worked so-so. We saw how well it worked. In 2011, 26 mistakes on the data set. That was this pipeline. That is pre-2012. And then, as you may remember, the Krzyzewski paper came out in 2012. And now we have this awesome magic black box where everything goes in, a deep neural network, and out comes the label. To some researchers, this is a little bit frustrating, and so it's part of this class. The aim of this class is to open this awesome box and look inside a little bit to see what's there. But the key idea is really, rather than having hand-engineered edge detectors, train a network that takes all the color information from the input image and generates an output in terms of a labeling as a cat or a background, if you will. So that you all can become magicians in how to make use of this tool for whatever topic you want. And I can assure you everyone needs deep networks. Let's look at the history a little bit more of deep learning. Some of the pioneers, but again, this is always a more or less random selection of who is considered a pioneer and who is not. But these are some of the people that did very influential works. There's McCulloch and Pitts, who tried to understand how the brain could produce highly complex patterns by using basic cells that are connected together. And they call these cells neurons, inspired by the biological neurons. And who came up with neural processing? that's old. Even Sigmund Freud had drawings of neurons interacting in the brain, right? And so the idea that neurons process things in the brain, this is something that is very old. The neurons of Pitts and McCulloch, they were threshold units. So basically, once a certain sum of input signal is above a threshold, the neuron would send out a signal, it would fire, so to speak. But these were hardwired decision processes. There was no learning involved in the McCulloch-Pitts. And that came later. In 1915, the perceptron was the first model that could learn weights given examples. So this kind of sparked this learning paradigm that you have a set of training examples, an image of a cat with a label, this is a cat, much like you do with children, right? When you have little children, you tell them what the things are in their world, otherwise they won't be able to name them, right? You say, this is a dog, this is a cat, this is a horse. And initially, you know, the performance is so-so, it needs enough training data to get better. I remember we went to Egypt when my son was maybe a year old and he couldn't really speak. He could only say single syllables at the time. And then he saw his first camel and he stood in front of it and the camel was huge, at least compared to him, right? And that's when he said his very first two-syllable word, camel. He was so mesmerized with this thing, he kept saying, camel, camel, camel. And when we came home, no matter whether it was a horse or a cow, he would always say, camel, camel, right? This is how humans work when they don't have enough training data, right? And it, as you know, takes years for the human to develop the capacities that you all have, right? It's not something that we're born with. I think some of the learning mechanisms are inbuilt into our brain, but we need training data. That's why you send children to school, right? So that they can learn and train and develop their capacities, right? And so you can do that with machines. And this perceptron, it was called 1950, marks kind of the first model that could be learned with weights. There were others. There were Widrow and Hoff. They developed an adaptive linear element called Adeline. This was actually hardware, right? And the weights were encoded by potentiometers, and connections were actually physical connections in hardware, right? But then there was a massive roadblocker, I've highlighted here in red, a problem studied by people like Minsky and Papert, the same Seymour Papert with the Vision Summer Project, you remember. And they struggled with the XOR. Why is XOR a challenge? You know, if you want, you know, with these neural networks, you can, and the perceptron, you can train a linear classifier that goes into your input space and says, and finds a line. And you can train a linear classifier to separate the cats from the non-cat images, if you will, and you have a separator. Anything on that side is a cat, anything on this side is not. So far, so good. But what do you do if in your input space the cats are the black dots and the dogs or not cats are the white dots? There is no linear separator that can separate the black dots from the white dots in the XOR, right? In the example on the left, you can find a linear classifier separator, but in the example on the right, this XOR, there is no linear classifier that does it. And that is one of the issues that marked what's called the dark age of AI, the AI winter. At that point, the community decided AI does not work. And they gave up. A lot of people gave up. Not everyone, fortunately, and especially, you know, then people developed lots of other techniques. For example, then there's something that came out. It's called the multi-layer perceptron. And the key idea there is the first idea that goes a little bit deeper. It takes more than an input and an output layer. It has hidden layers. It has multiple layers. This was called the perceptron. And you can train it much like you train a linear classifier. And in particular, this training is nowadays often referred to as backpropagation learning, something you may have heard. One shouldn't overrate too much the backpropagation learning concept. You know, if you want to know who invented backpropagation learning, it's a gray zone, right? The other day I ascribed backpropagation learning to Rumelhart, Hinton, and Williams, like many people do. And then my friend Jürgen Schmidhuber sent me an email saying, Daniel, they didn't invent the backpropagation learning. If you know Jürgen, you will know he always says that someone didn't invent something, right? And he's often right, you know, and he said there's an earlier paper by such and such that already does it. But then I said, Jürgen, remind me, backpropagation learning is essentially gradient descent with a chain rule. And gradient descent and the chain rule were probably invented either by Newton or by Leibniz or someone like that, right? So if you want, you can say they invented backpropagation learning, right? So, you know, it really depends on what exactly you're talking about. I think many people made contributions. But the interesting thing about the perceptron is they had hidden layers and they were able to represent nonlinear decision boundaries. And another alternative that came out in the late 90s is the support vector machines by Vapnik and collaborators that also allowed to compute nonlinear decision boundaries. But there was some handcrafted aspects that went into it, in particular so-called kernel functions that had to be chosen appropriately. And so there was still need for something that really is black box, where you don't need a human to choose neither the input filters nor the kernel functions that go into this method. Vapnik, by the way, I don't know if he's still alive, but we overlapped. I was in Princeton for some time, and we had a lot of contact there. He always said I should buy a house in Princeton, because he'd bought a house in Princeton. And I did not buy a house, and a year after, the house prices crashed, and I thought, good thing I didn't listen to Vapnik. Yep, he's still, he's an amazing researcher, though, definitely. And so are all of these pioneers, obviously. Then the deep networks came out. You know, there are many pioneers. There's people like Geoff Hinton and Ruslan, but there's also Jan LeCun and many others. Schmidhuber was one of the people who did a lot of research in that area as well. Yeah, you've seen this picture. That is the classification on the ImageNet, and basically it shows you that from the advent of deep learning, the performance was massively improved. What has changed? You know, this is the Krzyzewski et al. 2012 paper. Above, you see a paper by an architecture that Jan LeCun proposed to classify digits in the so-called MNIST dataset. This is a postal code dataset that has letters like the one on the left, and there's only a finite number, let's say 26 or so, and you want to classify which one it is. And guess what? That works. Nowadays, letters, handwritten letters, can be processed automatically, and guess what you have in it? A neural network, of course, and that's been like that. You know, even in '98, Jan proposed this, and if you look at these architectures, yeah, there is a lot of similarity. So you can't really claim that the Krzyzewski work invented this architecture. You know, there's been many people involved in this effort. Yeah. And I guess sometimes it's hopeless to find the real pioneer. Somehow the world always wants one pioneer. For example, in Nobel Prizes, you know, there is a regulation, it has to be 3. It cannot be more than 3. And then you take the AlphaFold paper, it has 30 authors. They pick 2 of these. Why these 2? Why not others? Beats me, right? I mean, There's a lot of randomness in all of that. I think it's because when Nobel was alive and set up the regulations, we didn't have the research consortia that we often have today. What made all of these breakthroughs possible is many things. First of all, the big data age. And one shouldn't underestimate the importance of this data set ImageNet in the whole game. For someone, and this wasn't Fei Fei's first paper, she already had a Caltech 101, I think it was called. It had like 100 images and you were supposed to classify what's in each image. This was during her PhD. We overlapped in Los Angeles at the time. And then she went on and did a massive effort with ImageNet with 14 million images, because then you know you can actually start training algorithms to see what performance you get on real data. And so a lot of innovation in our field comes from data sets. For example, my main area of research is 3D computer vision, understanding how to reconstruct the world from moving cameras, and we've been putting a lot of data sets out there of moving cameras observing the world, and you know this helped to sparked a lot of innovation. And same with ImageNet for recognition, because you can train models. They have training data, labeled training data, and you can just train your algorithms. Then hardware, in particular graphics processing units. And this is what's often considered one of the cornerstones of the 2012 effort. They put things on the graphics hardware to accelerate the training. That was 2012. We've been using GPUs to accelerate compute since 2005, actually. So I would say the deep network community was a little bit late to find the GPU. But these GPUs are powerful and they make a big difference. And it's a bit of a critical issue today. Why? Because they cost millions and there is so much funding that goes into buying GPUs. And without it, you cannot do certain things that need a lot of GPU to train. Like generative AI, you've heard about lots of these things. ChatGPT, stable diffusion to synthesize images. These are all neural network approaches that need massive training and that need lots of GPUs. And we are getting to an age where for academia, it's not very easy to compete with Google, Meta, and other companies or Microsoft in terms of who has more GPUs. And that's a bit unfortunate, because if that then determines whether you get a paper published, you know, the fact of who has the most GPUs, then that's not so good. And the other thing that really made the success happen, not just the data and the hardware to train on, but the deep neural networks, the complex models that enable to learn complex relationships between input, an image of a cat, and output, the label cat. There's a lot of pioneers. Here's 3 of them that received the Turing Award in 2019. There's Geoff Hinton again, who was also the Nobel recipient, but also Jan LeCun and Joshua Bengio. But I mentioned there are many, many pioneers in this field. This is just a few. You can look at deep learning and study its success over the years. Here is statistics from the flagship computer vision conferences, CVPR and ICCV, and you see that the number of papers referring to deep learning grows significantly, or I think it's the percentage of papers that relate to deep learning, and from around 0% in 2012 to 25% just 4 years later. And you can compare to other developments. For example, there is generative adversarial networks, or LSTMs, and you can see the popularity of these different terms in the thousands of publications that are being published year by year. Where are we today? Well, there are so many applications of deep learning. You see them every day with your smartphone in all sorts of applications. You can do object detection. You can, even in a single image detect multiple objects, and you can even find bounding boxes. You can even segment them pixel accurately if you want, with certain algorithms, to detect dogs or hats, or, for self-driving, you can detect obstacles, people, cars, pedestrians, cyclists, everything. This is not even the state of the art, I would say, but just to give you example results. How we can use deep networks to understand the world around us and make that data available to a self-driving car, for example. And then I mentioned it, medical, right? I showed tuberculosis screening earlier. Here's an example of cancer detection, where you can identify, is there cancers and which areas have the cancer? And guess what? This is all being done with deep networks today. I mentioned AlphaGo already. You can do, emoticon suggestions, write a text and the system will recommend an emoticon. You can do machine translation. There's always room for improvement, I would say, but yeah, it's gotten a lot better, right? If I look back 5 to 10 years, it was very hard to find systems that could do a good translation. Nowadays, I wouldn't say it's perfectly solved, but fairly solved. Nowadays, you have systems like DeepL, for example. It's no secret why it's called DeepL, right? There is a deep network in it. And you can put in text in almost any language. Well, maybe not any, but many of the common languages, and it will do a fairly decent job in translating to other languages. You can train neural networks to play games. This is a very popular thing to do. And the idea being that you train them from the visual input. So you have the same input as the human player, right? And you want to process, and you can try to abstract intermediate representations, for example, map locations of where you are as a player in the maze, etc. And then you can try to find actions that will result in you winning the game. And they've done this with a lot of computer games from the 80s and 90s, and with a fair amount of success. Here's another example. This is a video. I don't know if there's sound though. Let me see.
I'm so curious.
I sense your excitement. Ask me anything.
It's a system called
Tell me
Lambda
what I would see if I
that was
visited.
put out by Google, a chat.
You would get to see a massive canyon,
chatbot, basically.
some frozen icebergs, geysers, and some craters.
It sounds beautiful.
I assure you it is worth the trip. However, you need to bring your coat, because it gets really cold.
I'll keep that in mind. Hey, I was wondering, have you ever had any visitors?
Yes, I have had some. The most notable was New Horizons, the spacecraft that visited me.
That must have been exciting.
The team that created New Horizons was very excited to see me. I also sent them back a picture of myself since I had not been seen up close before.
That's so great. What else do you wish people knew about you?
I wish people knew that I am not just a random ice ball. I am actually a beautiful planet.
Well, I think you're beautiful.
I am glad to hear that. I don't get the recognition I deserve. Sometimes people refer to me as just a dwarf planet.
Don't let it bother you. You're amazing.
Thank you for the kind words. I appreciate it.
Thanks for talking with me.
So you see, this is a chatbot that was put out under the name Lambda. And I think around 2022, they, for various reasons, terminated that development. But you know of many others. You know of ChatGPT. You know there's a number of language models that are coming out. All the big companies are fervently developing their own language model. There's one from Meta that came out now. I'm sure there's going to be one from Apple soon. Because, you know, and these systems are very powerful. If you tried ChatGPT, who has not tried ChatGPT? Really? She hasn't tried it. Why not? You don't have a computer at home. You don't think it's necessary? Well, that's because you haven't tried it yet. No. You should try it. It's quite amazing. I try it sometimes, and for certain things it's very useful. For example, you can say, tell me about deep learning and how I can teach it at TU Munich, and in fractions of a second it will generate a full course syllabus. Pretty nice, right? So I could say, why am I standing here, you know? And no kidding, sooner or later we'll all be replaced by some AI. You can not only generate text, but you can also generate images, much in the same way. You can train it on, and there's different ways for image generation and image synthesis, but one very popular technique that was pioneered by techniques like DALL-E 2 or Stable Diffusion is that you give it a text prompt and it will generate the corresponding image. And here in DALL-E 2 at the time you could choose, you know, teddy bears shopping for groceries in the style of ukiyo-e, and this is what you would get. An image that looks like it was drawn by an artist, but this was never drawn by an artist. This was entirely AI generated. When I say entirely AI generated, this is very tricky, right? Because you know the training data has seen millions and trillions of images. How can you be sure that this image is not somewhere in the training data? And this is not so easy to validate, right? People would then often do simple tests and compare to all the images in the training data. Yeah, but what if the training data contains the image slightly shifted? Then maybe you won't find it, and slightly rotated, right? So actually validating that what is generated is not somehow in the training data already is not easy. It's tricky. And in a way, these learning algorithms do what any learning algorithm does. They memorize. They memorize and put together things from memory and assemble them. And you know, there's also deep networks that generate music, right? And recently I heard a big complaint from the music industry saying, this is not fair. The AI takes all our past musical scores and just re-synthesizes them to something new, right? My experience is that is exactly what pretty much every composer in the world does. You've heard music, and if you listen to modern pop music, you can almost immediately pick on which aspects did they assemble from which other songs, right? It's just recycling things. That's what humans do. And then people say, but are machines really creative? Well, you define what is creativity, other than putting together things that we've seen or heard before, right? That's what we always do as humans, and that's what machines can do in pretty much exactly the same way. I would say this is creative. For example, another thing is a technique called Stable Diffusion, a technique that was developed here in Munich by Björn Ommer, who is a PI in our Munich Center for Machine Learning, professor of computer vision at LMU. Him and his team developed in these papers a technique called Stable Diffusion. There was a diffusion before, but this one was, you know, much more efficient and streamlined, and it generates images from text prompts. And about a year ago, I was on sabbatical in Oxford with a family, and if you've ever been to the UK, you know, it rains a lot, and it rained, and we were sitting home, and I have 3 kids, and they wanted to draw and paint. And they always want me to print something for them to paint and to color. But then the issue is The older ones, they like Star Wars, and the little one, she likes unicorns, right? And I was a bit lazy, so I went to the software that my friend Björn Amma developed, Stable Diffusion, and I put in, generate an image of Darth Vader on a unicorn in Oxford, right? You put it in the machine, and a few seconds later, you get a set of images that show you Darth Vader on a unicorn in Oxford. All right, it's not perfect, right? I mean, for example, the image on the left, you could say, that foot of the unicorn doesn't look very healthy somehow. It's much like the output of ChatGPT. It's not perfect. You should never believe everything that GPT generates, right? So maybe you're right in being skeptical about using ChatGPT, right? It can fool you, it can tell you things, and it's always very confident when it does so, but it doesn't mean it's right, right? Same here, so there are slight mistakes in what it generates that are not really correct, yeah. Or on the right image, you could say, where's the unicorn? Where's your unicorn, Darth Vader? You were supposed to be on a unicorn. Well, I guess he stepped down from the unicorn for the photograph. And it looks like a photograph, right? This is not a photograph. This was completely synthetically generated. This picture, there was no real scene that existed that looked like that. And so we get into an age where we can synthesize images, videos at arbitrary quality that are completely synthetically generated and that can show anything. So for example, for evidence in court, for crimes, using video nowadays is pretty pointless because you can synthesize any video of anything that you want, of any person saying anything. I'll show you examples in a second. You can do in painting and out painting. You can start with an image and then you can use Stable Diffusion, for example, to say, just a second, there's a video. To say here, generate an apple in the hand, generate something here with that, and you can expand the image and it will synthesize a table. Now you'd say this table doesn't fit style-wise with the lady, right? It's a modern table. Yeah, so there are mistakes, right? You can erase again and say, I want this chandelier higher up or something, right? And so that way you can generate images where you basically say what you want to be there, right? And this may be much faster than painting it yourself, right? And much more plausible. Or you can generate videos. This is a company that my friend Matthias created, Synthesia. There's sound as well, sorry. Why is it not playing the sound?
Of Munich. I am an AI to the introduction. A lecture at the Technical University of Munich. Who will be teaching this lecture, and we will be having a lot of fun together. We will talk about neural networks, how to train them with
So this is a synthesized video.
and how the latest CNN models work for image classification and segmentation. Welcome to...
Let's see.
Vorlesung an der Technischen Universität München. Ihr Avatar, der diese Vorlesung halten wird, und wir werden viel Spaß zusammen haben.
Yeah, very convincing, you can tell. There's still room for improvement, but this is not the latest version, I think. So, but this is a huge market for AI, for deep networks, for machine learning. There's a prediction $415 billion market by 2030. If you've ever seen such predictions of market growth, don't buy them, You can make such a prediction for pretty much everything. They're completely hand-wavy kind of numbers, and they always skyrocket in the coming years. This is the kind of plots that you show investors if you want them to put money into your startup. I've done that, and I don't actually buy the statistics myself, but the important thing is that the venture capitalists buy them, right? It works, I can say from example. So there's excellent job perspectives in this field of AI and deep learning. There's many industries. There's a lot of challenges that often a high-level background is not enough. You need more practical skill sets of how to actually make them work. It's a very competitive field. You know, often if you really want to dig deeper and understand methodological innovations and contribute to them, you know, this is where you would actually do a PhD in this field. A bit more at the end of this class, you know, deep learning in the media, there's a lot of memes on social networks. Here's an example of deep learning. Very literal understanding of deep learning. This one I like in particular. And I know this, Jan told me he really likes it because they put his face in there, obviously. So what society thinks I do, you know, the Terminator. What my friends think I do, somehow combine a brain with a chip or something. What computer scientists think I do, just sleeping on a stack of cash. What mathematicians think I do, just a stupid dog who codes things. What I think I do, obviously, the guy thinks he's Jan LeCun. And what I actually do from Theano import. So this is the popular software library that a lot of people were using. Yeah, more examples of deep learning on memes, deep learning everywhere. Here's another nice case. Types of headache, migraine, hypertension, stress, math behind deep learning. It completely freaks you out. I think I'll stop at this point. We're at the end of time for today and we'll reconvene on Thursday. Thank you.